In the 1800s, a living tide of 30 million bison covered North America. By the 1890s, fewer than 1,000 were left. Not 1,000 herds, 1,000 animals total. How did an entire species almost vanish in a single lifetime? And who stepped up when it mattered most? This is the comeback you won't believe. First, let's clear up a name mix-up you've probably heard your whole life. Those shaggy icons of the American West? They're not true buffalo. Real buffalo live in Africa and Asia. Think the Cape buffalo of the savannah or the water buffalo of Southeast Asia. The animals we're talking about are American bison, native only to North America, with a close cousin called the European bison across the Atlantic. You can spot an American bison right away if you know what to look for. They have that massive muscular shoulder hump built for plowing through deep snow in winter to reach grass underneath. Their fur is thick and shaggy, so dense it can keep them warm even when temperatures drop 40 degrees below zero. And they're big. Full-grown males can weigh up to a ton, making them the largest land mammal on the entire continent. They may look slow and lumbering, but don't be fooled. A bison can run 35 miles an hour, faster than most Olympic sprinters. So where did the buffalo name come from anyway? It started with French fur trappers who roamed the plains hundreds of years ago. They called the huge ox-like animals boeuf, the French word for ox. English-speaking settlers picked up the word, twisted it around, and buffalo stuck. It's a common mistake, so common that even today, most people use the two names interchangeably, but the name mix-up is far from the most dramatic part of the bison story. Beyond the silly label confusion, there's a much darker chapter in their history. One that almost erased them completely, faster than almost any wildlife collapse in recorded history. We opened with those jaw-dropping numbers, 30 million down to fewer than 1,000 in just a few decades. That's not a slow decline. That's a deliberate, systematic wipeout, driven by forces most people don't learn about in standard history class. To understand that, we need to see what the world looked like when bison ruled the plains. Before 1800, estimates put the North American bison population at 30 to 60 million strong. These herds were the largest gatherings of a single land mammal in recorded history. Some stretches of the Great Plains would go dark for days as a single herd moved through, shaking the ground underfoot. For the dozens of Plains Native American tribes that shared this land, bison were far more than just wild animals. They were the foundation of entire ways of life. Tribes used every part of the animal: meat for food, hides for clothing and tippies, hooves for glue, bones for tools and weapons. The connection ran deeper than survival, too. Bison were woven into creation stories, spiritual ceremonies, and core cultural identities. Tribes managed herds carefully, hunting only what they needed and honoring each animal they took. Everything shifted with westward expansion in the 1800s. Railroads pushed across the plains, slicing through historic bison ranges and bringing a new kind of hunter with them. These weren't subsistence hunters feeding their communities, they were market hunters, paid by hide companies to kill as many bison as possible, as fast as possible. There was another, darker goal too. US government leaders openly supported the slaughter as a way to break the resistance of plains native nations. If you eliminated the bison, you eliminated the food source and cultural anchor that let tribes stay independent on their own land. The killing was industrial in scale. Passenger trains would stop mid-journey so travelers could lean out windows and shoot bison for sport. No one would even stop to collect the bodies. Hunters on horseback would kill hundreds of animals in a single day, skin them for their hides, and leave the rest of the carcass to rot on the plains. By the 1870s, hide hunters were shipping more than 1 million bison hides east every single year. You've probably seen the haunting photos from this era. Mountains of bison skulls stacked 20 feet high, waiting to be ground up for fertilizer or bone china. These images aren't just a record of waste, they're a visual marker of how fast and how thoroughly humans dismantled a species that had thrived for thousands of years. By the late 1880s, the full toll was clear. Fewer than 1,000 wild bison remained on the entire continent. That's a drop from tens of millions to barely a remnant, all in the span of about 40 years. It's one of the fastest, most dramatic wildlife collapses ever documented, and most of it was entirely intentional. The herds that once shook the plains were gone, and the native communities tied to them were displaced, starved, and forced onto reservations. For a time, it looked like bison would be nothing more than a footnote in history books, a story people told about a world that no longer existed. And just when it seemed like the last bison would vanish, a small group of unlikely heroes stepped into the story. You might not expect a taxidermist to be the bison's biggest champion, but that's exactly who stepped up first. His name was William Temple Hornaday, and he spent the 1880s traveling the West to collect bison specimens for museum displays. What he saw on those trips changed him forever. Hornaday didn't just find a few scattered bison. He witnessed the final days of the slaughter, pile upon pile of bones, and hunters still gunning down every last animal they could find. He realized that if he didn't act fast, the only bison anyone would ever see again would be stuffed behind glass. He shifted his entire mission. Instead of collecting bison for display, he started collecting them to save them. He brought 15 of the last wild bison to the Bronx Zoo in New York, where they could breed safely away from hunters. Those 15 bison were the start of something huge. Hornaday wrote books, gave speeches, and badgered politicians until the entire country started paying attention to the bison crisis he'd seen firsthand. His hard work paid off in 1905 when the American Bison Society was founded. They didn't just have regular members, they landed President Theodore Roosevelt as their honorary president. Roosevelt was a famous outdoorsman and conservationist, and his support turned a small group's passion into a national priority overnight. The society got straight to work building the first official conservation herds. They partnered with Yellowstone National Park, where a tiny group of less than 50 bison had somehow survived the slaughter in the park's remote valleys. They also used the Bronx Zoo's growing herd to start new populations on public land across the West. Every calf born was counted, every herd was carefully managed, and slowly, against all odds, the numbers started to climb. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy, but for the first time in decades, bison weren't sliding toward extinction anymore. Today, there are roughly 500,000 bison across North America. That sounds like a massive win, and it is, but there's a catch you might not know about. Most of those bison are privately owned, raised on ranches for meat and hides, just like cattle, and a lot of them aren't fully bison at all. Back in the early 1900s, some ranchers experimented with crossbreeding bison and cattle to create a hardier, meatier animal. Those experiments didn't work out the way they hoped, but they left cattle genes in many of the bison herds that exist today. Truly wild, genetically pure bison are incredibly rare. The most famous of those herds lives right in Yellowstone, and it only numbers a few thousand individuals. That's it, a few thousand animals carrying the full, unbroken genetic line of the 30 to 60 million bison that once covered the plains. It's a victory, no question about it, but it's a fragile one. And it only happened because a taxidermist with a conscience refused to let a species disappear on his watch. You might think that's the end of the story, that the bison's return is just a nice little conservation win we can pat ourselves on the back for, but you'd be wrong, because it turns out what we saved isn't just an animal, it's an entire world builder. Scientists call bison a keystone species. That means the whole prairie ecosystem revolves around them. Their grazing, trampling, and wallowing create habitats for dozens of other animals that could not survive without them. Bison do not just eat every blade of grass in front of them. They graze selectively, picking certain grasses and leaving others untouched. This creates a mosaic of different grass heights across the prairie. Tall patches give cover for ground-nesting birds. Short patches let sunlight reach wildflowers, which feed hundreds of species of bees and butterflies. Then there are the wallows. You have probably seen videos of bison rolling in deep dust baths. Those shallow depressions they dig into the soil do not stay dry forever. When it rains, they fill up with water and turn into tiny temporary wetlands. Those little pools are breeding grounds for frogs, toads, and salamanders. They also give birds, coyotes, and insects a critical drink when water is scarce out on the open plains. Even prairie dogs owe a lot to bison. Those small social rodents thrive on the short, tender grass that grows back after bison graze. The Prairie dog colonies in turn become hubs of life for other animals. Black-footed ferrets hunt them for food. Burrowing owls nest in their abandoned tunnels. Rattlesnakes use those same tunnels to escape the heat and cold. Take the bison away, and the prairie dogs fade too. Then all the animals that depend on prairie dogs vanish right after them. It does not stop there. Even bison dung is a tiny, self-contained micro-ecosystem. It fertilizes the soil, feeding the roots of the grasses that hold the prairie together. Young beetles lay their eggs inside it, and those beetles are food for birds and small mammals. Bison also eat seeds from wildflowers and grasses, and those seeds pass through their gut unharmed. When they drop their dung miles away, they spread those seeds across the plains, helping plants move and adapt to changing conditions. Where bison were completely wiped out, all of these cascading effects vanished too. Prairies turned into uniform, low-diversity grasslands with far fewer birds, insects, and small mammals. But reintroduction projects across the Great Plains have shown something incredible. When bison come back, the land heals. Plant diversity bounces back within a few years. Bird populations rise. Amphibians return to the wallows. The whole system sparks back to life, almost like flipping a switch. You might have thought saving bison was just about keeping one iconic animal around. But the truth is, we did not just save a species, we saved the engineer that builds the prairie itself. That secret changes everything about how we think of these animals, and it's why their story isn't over yet. The whole system sparks back to life, almost like flipping a switch. You might have thought saving bison was just about keeping one iconic animal around, but the truth is, we did not just save a species. We saved the engineer that builds the prairie itself. That secret changes everything about how we think of these animals, and it's why their story isn't over yet. Now, scientists have found an even bigger surprise. Their grazing doesn't just bring back prairie plants, it grows the deep-rooted native grasses that lock away massive amounts of carbon deep underground. Bison, it turns out, are unexpected, powerful climate allies. That answers the question that has stumped even researchers for years. What does this animal do that helps fight climate change? It builds the prairie, and the prairie stores carbon. So are the bison we see today really the same wild giants that once thundered across the plains? The answer is mostly yes, thanks to those few early conservationists who stepped in when no one else would. The private ranchers, the indigenous stewards, the small groups who refused to let these animals vanish, they didn't just save a small inbred population. They protected the core of the wild bison, the ones that still shaped the land exactly as their ancestors did. The much bigger mistake that nearly erased them? We thought we could destroy a keystone animal without destroying the whole prairie. We were wrong, but we fixed it in time. In 2016, that hard-won status got official recognition when the bison was named the U.S. National Mammal. That designation cemented its place not just as a wildlife icon, but as a core part of the country's cultural and historical identity. Today, the most important restoration work is being led by Native American tribes who are bringing bison back to ancestral lands. Those efforts don't just heal ecosystems, they revive traditions, cultural practices, and connections to the land that were broken when bison were nearly wiped out. You can still see wild bison yourself in places like Yellowstone, Badlands National Park, and the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve. If you want to support that work, you can donate or volunteer with groups like the American Prairie Reserve, which is building the largest nature reserve in the contiguous US around wild bison herds. The bison story is a rare, genuine success. From the brink of extinction to a symbol of resilience that still shapes the continent today. If you love stories of nature's greatest comebacks, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Remember, the tinsaptinisid, Sigs love back. The next time you see a bison, you're looking at a survivor that shaped an entire continent.